Hey everyone, thank you for joining me. On April 9, 1951, the police were called to an apartment in Paris where they discovered the body of a 48-year-old foreign man. But who was he? To the police, he was just a dead body, but he was soon to become known as one of the best novelists Iran has ever produced, and he had written one of the greatest and the most dangerous novels of all time. In comparison, let's go 2 centuries back. In 1774, Goethe, the German giant, wrote The Sorrows of Young Werther, a tragic romance which led to young men ending their lives after reading the novel, a phenomenon known as Werther fever, due to the heartbreak of men being rejected by women. If you think these men were pathetic, you might be right. But the same thing happened in 1937. This time it was no romance. The Blind Owl by Sadiq Hidayat is barely a novel, more like a long short story, barely 90 pages long. But the same fever, young men were ending their lives after reading it. So much so that this book has been banned and unbanned many times in Iran. Not just some gory horror story of death, but it's also incredibly poetic and artistic that the American playwright Henry Miller wished he had written it. To give you a little bit of perspective, if you put the writings of Franz Kafka, Carl Jung, Edgar Allan Poe, and the Buddha with the psyche of an Iranian nationalist into a blender, you might get The Blind Owl, condensed and lethal like the venom of cobra. In fact, the baby in the novel comes with a flask of wine mixed with cobra's venom. Okay, why is this considered the most dangerous novel? What makes it dangerous? And why is it considered the best Iranian novel of all time? And most importantly, why did the writer end his life? Let's find out. The Blind Owl by Sadiq Hidayat was first published in India in 1936. It was handwritten and with explicit message not to be sold in Iran. Why didn't he want to publish in Iran? Well, it was too disturbing for the government of Iran, back then a monarchy. But what makes it disturbing? Let's dive in. The novel is in 2 parts. Part 1 is a dream and part 2 is a deathbed confession. In part 1, the narrator is an artist who paints pen cases, but in part 2, he turns into a confessor telling his story to a shadow on the wall that looks like an owl, an ominous sign that he is on the verge of death himself. The first part describes what appears to be the narrator going through a dream of being in love with a girl, his cousin, who is breastfed by the same woman. Also to note that this woman is not his mother. In fact, he was adopted by his auntie. In addition to his love for his cousin, he also has a deep, opium-induced hatred towards her. The second part is just a confession of a past terrible events, including sex, murder, and burial. The first part is a dream and the second is real. So you could quote Leo Tolstoy, who said that life is a dream and death is waking up. The story starts with the narrator talking about his job as a mediocre pen case painter. The novel begins when he is interrupted by his uncle's return from India. He walks into the pantry to offer some wine to his uncle. But here we have one of the most beautiful cinematic break in literature. He suddenly glimpses a scene outside the house. The image is so powerful that sucks all his attention away from the task. He sees an old man sitting under a cypress tree with one of the most sinister and terrifying laughs in literature, and right next to him is a young, beautiful girl with the blackest of eyes. He's mesmerized by her beauty that he forgets his uncle and he can't remember how long he's been standing there, whether 1 minute or hours. He's so bewitched as though he falls under the spell of a serpent. And you know what? So is the reader. By the time he returns to his uncle, he is already gone and the door is left open. From that moment on, he becomes a tortured soul. He searches around his house for 2 months and 4 days precisely to find the tree, the old man, and the girl. But there is no trace of them. In order to deal with his loss, he turns to alcohol and opium to numb the pain of losing her. Quote, What was frightening was that I felt I was neither completely alive nor completely dead. I was but a moving corpse that could neither join the world of the living nor partake in the oblivion and peace of death. One night he spends hours prowling the streets endlessly. When he returns home, he sees that she is actually inside his house, the same girl with the blackest of eyes. The next moment, she's asleep in his bed. Wait a minute, she's not breathing. She's actually cold dead. He takes his clothes to embrace her so his body heat warms her up and perhaps brings her back to life. But his effort is useless. But this moment turns into an incredible moment of psychological insight into existence. But his mediocre mind is too stupid to capture this moment and turn into a masterpiece of psychological art. He spends all night drawing her face, but he fails to capture her true essence on a piece of paper. He draws and crumbles the paper. After many failed attempts, finally something miraculous happens. Her eyes opens for a split second, but that is enough for the artist to capture her eyes, hence her soul. Now our mediocre painter has captured the soul, the essence of a woman he loves. So her body can be discarded now. At this point, the novel becomes gory as he chops her head and arms into pieces to pack inside a suitcase. Struggling to carry the heavy suitcase, he notices the hunched old man with a sinister laughter sitting under the cypress tree outside his house. He turns out to be a gravedigger whose job is disposing dead bodies on a daily basis. They set off on a horse carriage traversing what appears to be through history, a landscape nostalgic and mysterious, the mountains, the hills, the windowless houses, as if he's traveling 1,000 years ago to the old Persian civilization. Finally, they arrive at a place when he offers to pay. The old man gives him sinister and horrific laughter, declining the money, saying that he knows his house so he can come later. While digging the grave, the old man has also discovered an old jug. Wrapping it inside a dirty piece of cloth, he sets off and disappears. The narrator buries the suitcase and then starts off without aim or care. After a while, lost and exhausted, he takes a rest, but suddenly the old man is sitting next to him, still clutching to the antique jug, but then suddenly he hands it over to the narrator. "Here, take it." They set off together to his house. Upon arrival, he wants to pay the old gravedigger for his service and the antique jug. By the time he's ready to pay, the old man has already disappeared. He unwraps the jug to find the face of the woman painted on the jug. He looks at his own painting. The face of the woman on the antique jug, painted at least 1,000 years ago, is exactly the same as the one he had painted the night before on a piece of paper. Shocked and terrified, he smokes a good chunk of opium to numb the horror of this mysterious discovery, and then he falls asleep. When he wakes up the next morning, he discovers that his hands and clothes are soaked in blood. This is the wake-up call he needs, and that's when he starts writing. Now we move to the second part of the novel, which is a long confession he tells to what appears to be a shadow on the wall. Quote, "My one fear is that tomorrow I may die without having come to know myself." He starts by describing his life, his living condition, and the fact that yesterday he was a young man, but today he's an old, hunchback man. He lives in a place close to an ancient city of Rey, now part of Greater Tehran. He tells that he and his wife were both nursed by the same woman, his aunt. Here he tells us about his father who, with his twin brother, worked in India as tradesmen, and there his father meets Begum Dasi, the narrator's mother, the only character named in the novel. She was a temple dancer when his father fell in love with her, or rather fell into her spell or venom, as there is a snake-like quality to this woman. As a baby boy, he's returned to Iran to be raised by his aunt, who also nursed the narrator's future wife, his cousin, whom he later calls Slut. The only thing he has from his mother is a flask of wine, which is mixed with the venom of cobra. It was a present from his mother. His marriage to his cousin is also a sham marriage. His cousin, whom he calls Slut, forcefully kisses him on her mother's deathbed when the father barges in, and at that moment it's decided that they should get married to keep her reputation. On the wedding night, she refuses to sleep with him, saying that she is on her period. Despite his many attempts, she refuses to sleep with him for 2 months and 4 days. But it turns out, all along she's been sleeping with other men. Hence, he calls her slut. His obsession with her turns into madness, and as day goes by, he becomes weak and weaker, so they call the doctor to examine him. But his condition deteriorates. One time, in the middle of delirium, he remembers his wife coming touching his forehead with her cold hand. Then she disappears for 2 years and 4 months. One day he feels better, so he takes a walk outside. It seems he walks for a long distance. As he gets out of the city and arrives near an ancient river and sits under a cypress tree, the same tree that he'd seen her and the old man. Time passes so much that by the time he returns home, he discovers that his head is missing from his shadow. Looking in the mirror, he can barely recognize himself. The doctor is called once again, and the bad news is that he's not getting better. His aunt turns to God and prays for his health. It appears that death is creeping closer. His thoughts are filled with dead people. His mental health is deteriorating even worse than his physical health. Then one day the wife shows up. They have an argument, she leaves, and he's alone once again. All this time that he's stuck in his room, there is a song that plays in his ear. The song beckons him to go to the city of Ray and start drinking wine. At some point, he remembers that he's got a flask of wine in the pantry that his mother had left him when he was a baby. Later, when his aunt brings him some food, he notices there is also a knife next to his food. The aunt also gives him the news that his wife is apparently pregnant. He knows that he can't be the father. He drinks the wine mixed with cobra's venom and then grabs the knife. Finally, he has the courage to go to his wife's room. Much to his surprise, she actually invites him in. He's still holding the knife. They get naked. They embrace each other. Her mouth tastes bitter, like cucumber. But that's okay. Her arms wrapped around his neck and their legs locked together. Finally, he's able to have sex with her, but there's something twisting going on. He realizes that she has bitten his lip as blood is pouring down, and part of his lip is split into two. Her embrace is so tight that he cannot even escape. She has turned into a boa constrictor. Then he realizes that he is still holding the knife, and suddenly the knife starts sinking into her body. Blood splatters and she screams, and suddenly he is released. He's finally free. He returned to his room, realizing he's still holding her eyeball in his hand. The next moment, the old man shows up and takes the corpse with him and disappears. The next thing you know, the blood-soaked narrator is also covered with maggots and flies, as if he's a dead body walking. Here the story ends. Quote, there are people whose death agonies begin at the age of 20, while others die only at the very end, calmly and peacefully, like a lamp in which all the oil has been consumed. To understand the novel, it's important to know an important fact about Hidayat himself. He was an Iranian nationalist, nostalgic about the good old days of Persian Empire, dominating the region. A once glorious civilization competing with the Greeks and Romans, and a language spoken from Anatolia to India, now reduced to an insignificant pawn in geopolitics of the 20th century. This was heightened by the fact that Hidayat was educated in French, a proud man dealing with his inferiority complex until his death in Paris. It is for the same reason that today Iranians in the West don't call themselves Iranian. They call themselves Persian, in a way still clinging on to the glorious good old days of pre-Islamic Persian Empire. As a result, two of the main themes in novels are shame and impotence. Hidayat was a mentally tormented man. Quote, I thought to myself, if it's true that every person has a star in the sky, mine must be distant, dim, and absurd. Perhaps I never had a star. In 1927, just like the Japanese novelist Osamu Dazai, Hidayat attempted suicide by jumping into a river in Paris, but he was rescued. It's interesting that he attempted to end his life twice, and both times not in Iran or India, but in Paris. In Iran, there's a term, Gharbzadeh, which negatively describes Iranians who are bewitched, mesmerized by the West. as if infected by a disease or possessed by how shiny Europe is. Hidayat, while completely embracing Western secularism, was not bewitched by the West. On the contrary, Hidayat believed Iran deserved a much higher place in the world order than it held in the 20th century. But Paris, the symbol of Western civilization, with its glory only made him feel small and insignificant. The narrator is in love but also tormented by a pair of black eyes, like in Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart. Shame is a strong emotion and always tied to someone watching you, judging you, and tormenting you. The title of Blind Owl is an oxymoron because owls are known for their big eyes and incredible vision. So if you take away an owl's eyes, you have rendered it completely useless. So a blind owl is pure darkness where you can hide all your secrets and shame. His final act of freedom is holding the wife's eye socket in his bloody hand. But why is he ashamed? In the novel, the narrator is forced to marry a promiscuous woman who refuses to sleep with him, and finally, when he gets the chance to do so, he inserts a knife, perhaps symbolizing his own impotence. Natural selection only works if the male can perform in order to compete with other men. His wife sleeps around because the man himself is perhaps impotent. Not only he kills her, but he also kills her child, perhaps from another man. The narrator spends his days painting pen cases, but also consumes opium to numb the pain he feels. His reality is warped, so the story jumps in time and space. One moment you're in his room, the next he is somewhere in a distant world or an ancient time. His reality is an opium-induced reality, like a border town where life and death meet. Quote, "We are the children of death, and it's death that rescues us from the deceptions of life." In Buddhism and Hinduism, life-death is a cyclical process which is contrary to Middle Eastern linear religious belief, in which life is followed by afterlife and there is no reincarnation. Hidayat spent a few years in India learning about Hinduism and Buddhism, but also about ancient Persian language from Zoroastrian community that has survived in India. This is precisely the point that Persia was glorious, but now sits rock bottom. So history is not one-way street leading to progress, but it can also regress. Quote, "For me, something that happened yesterday might be more ancient or less effectual than an event that took place 1,000 years ago." Hidayat saw the Islamic conquest in 650 as a setback for Iran and the Persian civilization. So, in Buddhism, life is suffering and death frees you. In the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I have discussed here, soon after death you have the chance to liberate yourself from the cycle of reincarnation or the cycle of suffering. There's also a strong Jungian theme to the novel. Jung's theory of the collective unconscious argues that just like our DNA is passed from our ancestors, our cultural artifacts are also passed down. His archetypes are narrative characters which we use as cues to understand the world, like the father, the mother, the hero, the villain, and so on, are repeated and recycled throughout human history. In the novel, the narrator spends all night painting a portrait and only to discover that someone else had painted the same exact portrait 1,000 years ago. In other words, our past includes the past of all those who came before you. So everything is repeated and recycled. In fact, in the novel, like a low-budget movie, a few characters play all the roles. The uncle becomes a gravedigger. The wife becomes a muse of his painting, a whore, and an angel. The narrator is a painter in part 1 and a confessor and a murderer in part 2. So human characters are not new but recycled with every generation. The writing is beautiful, effortless, and flowing and dreamlike. His description is so vivid that it draws you in to read more. I think the reason it has become such a powerful book has to do with the way words are weaved together to create a really profound reading experience. It grabs you, especially the beginning. It's like you enter the mind of an opium addict, a romantic painter, a murderer, a dying man, or even a dead man. The voice is comic, dreamy, intoxicated, and tragic. We think of death as distant, unpleasant, and ugly, but reading this feels it's not that bad. It brings an Eastern perspective. It portrays death as something very mundane and natural, not only to be acknowledged, but even celebrated. It doesn't encourage, but liberates you from the fear of death. And perhaps that's why it's considered the most dangerous novel, which led to some people ending their lives after reading it. It should be read with a huge pinch of salt. My aim here was to summarize the story, but the actual experience of reading cannot be captured here. So my advice is not to read it if you're not in good frame of mind. Thank you very much.